All right. So this week on Access Evolved, we have a very special guest joining us. Adriano's here to tell us about the newest feature that Border0 is launching called Identity Federation for GitHub Actions. So tell us what it's all about.
Yeah, so this means that your CI/CD jobs can now use their CI identity to get short-lived Border0 tokens automatically.
All right. And so I guess let's take a step back and give some context here. So starting with kind of the pain that inspired this feature, from what you've told me, this is a real problem for platform teams. So it sounds like there's a difficult balance between kind of doing the right thing that's best for security, but keeping the team moving fast.
Yeah, exactly. So many engineering orgs have automation running in CI/CD
Mhm.
services like GitHub Actions, for example. And these jobs may be infrastructure deployments, code deployments, database migrations, privileged scripts. But the way that most teams manage access for CI/CD is honestly extremely cumbersome. It's
Mhm.
not very secure either.
Okay.
What happens is they'll put these long-lived credentials in GitHub secrets. They rotate tokens manually, hope nothing breaks. They often use credentials with too broad of access in order to avoid what's known as credential sprawl, where you
Mhm.
have all these secrets with different levels of permissions all over the place. Hard to keep track of them.
Mhm.
And the worst thing is, in particular with GitHub Actions, GitHub Actions secrets are write only. So let's say you
Okay.
have a secret that has to go in many different repos. Um, Once you've written a secret into a GitHub Action secret, you can't see it again. So if
Mhm.
you miss one of those repos, you have to start over and rotate the secret once again. So long story short, you have this constant tension between security and velocity.
Mhm.
And the problem really scales with your organization's size as well. So the more components you have, the more pipelines, the more secrets, and the more time that your engineering organization ends up spending managing all this stuff that at the end of the day doesn't deliver any value to your customers.
Oh, it sounds like a serious nightmare. Okay. So I guess if you've ever said, "Oh, I don't remember which repos I need to update this secret in again," or "Our secrets in GitHub are a mess," this episode is really for you. So today we're launching Identity Federation for GitHub Actions through Border0. And Identity Federation, this is really for engineering teams that want to reduce credential sprawl, reduce time wasted managing secrets for their CI platform, and would rather spend their time, like you said, shipping value for their customers. So tell us how it works.
Yeah, so the idea is fairly simple. You create a service account in Border0, and then instead of creating a static token for that service account, what you do is you add a rule so that Border0 trusts GitHub Actions in a particular organization, repository, and maybe even a specific branch. And
Okay.
then whenever your GitHub Action job runs, it can use its GitHub identity to request a short-lived Border0 token, effectively exchanging its GitHub credentials for Border0 credentials just in time. And then that Border0 token can be used to access the servers that the service account is allowed to reach and nothing more. And then also service accounts with identity federation can be used also to perform administrative actions in Border0
Hmm.
itself, like creating sockets, policies, anything that a human can do in Border0 through the Border0 admin portal or API. The service account running in a GitHub action can do using its federated identity credentials.
Oh, awesome. So this sounds like one of those features that's just sort of quietly transformative. It's not just about security, it's really about productivity. So we're making your pipelines easier to maintain, your secrets are easier to govern, and the security model becomes more consistent across humans and automation. So, I mean, this is really in line with what we think modern access should look like, right? So, all right, can you give us a quick demo?
Sure, let's jump right in.
All right.
So in this repo, Adriano Sella slash Border0-demo, I have predefined a very simple GitHub action workflow. It's using our official Border0 configure Border0 network GitHub action to configure networking in the GitHub action machine. Note that here we are passing absolutely no static credentials, only my Border0 organization subdomain and a service account name. The workflow then installs the MySQL client and then proceeds to run a query against a host with hostname test MySQL server. Specifically, it's going to list all rows from the authors table in the books database. Let's go ahead and trigger this manually. After a few seconds, we can see the workflow's output and verify that the workflow was able to query the database effectively over Border0. And if we head over to the Border0 admin portal and head over to the sessions page, we can audit exactly what happened during this session. Here's our query. Select star from authors. And here's our device. You can see that it was last seen 2 minutes ago, managed by the service account GitHub Actions. So you may be wondering at this point, how come I did not have to give my workflow any credentials for Border0? This is the magic of Identity Federation for Border0 service accounts. I've configured Border0 to trust GitHub workflows in this particular GitHub organization, repo, and branch. So what happens under the hood in that workflow right before Border0 networking is set up is that the GitHub Action workflow will exchange its GitHub issued credentials for Border0 credentials, specifically for the Border0 organization and service account I mentioned in the workflow definition. And in terms of configuration on the Border0 side, all I had to do was go to the service accounts page, GitHub Actions, and add an Identity Federation rule to allow the repo Adriano Border0 demo on all branches. And that's all. A few clicks in the portal and a few lines of YAML is all it takes to get your GitHub workflows to talk to your servers in your private networks or corporate environments.
Love that. Looks super slick. So tell me in your own words, what kind of prompted you to build this?
Yeah, so over the years, several customers have asked, how can I run something against a socket in a GitHub action?
Mhm.
And the answer has always been sort of the status quo of API keys and secrets management. You'd have to go and create a service account, and then you create a static token for it, maybe a short-lived token that you'll be
Mhm.
rotating all the time if you're security-minded, or a long-lived token if you don't mind the security implications of it. It was just too cumbersome,
Mhm.
especially when you needed to provision the same secret in many places.
Yeah.
Um, and it just came to me one morning. I was thinking about how our GitHub Action workflows internally at Border0 for managing our AWS infrastructure. They use no long-lived secrets. They
Mhm.
use their GitHub identity to authenticate against AWS. And I was thinking, oh, maybe we could do the same for Border0, right? If AWS has a way to trust GitHub Actions, surely there's a way that Border0 can also trust GitHub Actions. And so I dug into it a little bit, and it turns out it was very simple under the hood. So that's kind of what prompted us to build it.
Yeah, that's so cool. I love that inspiration. So, I guess, yeah, it sounds like if you were doing this today, there's a possibility you could be doing some like workarounds or something that's not quite as secure. So, this feels like a really big value add.
Yeah, it's huge. And it's not only a security improvement in terms of facilitating secrets management, but you also get to benefit from all the things you get out of the box with Border0, right?
Mhm.
Auditability, session logs, where you can watch, a video recording of what your service account did. You also get to use Border0 policies to manage access. And on top of that, the UX is just way better than the status quo, right? All you need to do to set this up is click a couple times in the admin portal and add maybe 10 lines of YAML in your GitHub workflow definitions.
Oh, I love it. We like a improved UX and a light lift. So, okay, tell me what are a couple of actual real life use cases?
Yeah, so, well, one big one is, for example, if you manage your Border0 environment, sockets, policies, users, groups using Terraform, now
Hmm.
you can do it. You can deploy this Terraform in a GitHub action where the job assumes a service account's level of permission with no long-lived credentials. And that is huge. That's just way
Yeah.
easier than the status quo. And then, so that's sort of the admin use cases. And then on the
Hmm.
other side, we have the end user use cases where, for example, you want your GitHub action to talk to an internal web application or an
Hmm.
internal database that's not exposed to the internet. Your GitHub action can now do this, again, with no long-lived credentials.
Ah, it sounds like such a huge time saver and just so much less risk.
It's
Um,
huge. I mean, honestly, it's one of my favorite releases that we've done in a while.
I love that. All right. So does this work only for GitHub Actions?
So, no, today we have explicit support for GitHub Actions,
Mhm.
GitLab CI/CD. Um, we are building support for CircleCI at the moment,
Okay.
but the feature is built such that Border0 can trust any OpenID Connect issuer. So even if we don't
Cool.
support your platform explicitly, you're able to set it up as well.
All right. And I guess the burning question, is this available right now?
It's live.
Awesome. All right. So if you're tired of credential sprawl in GitHub Actions or you want your automation flow to follow the same zero trust model as your humans, this is the feature for you. So try it out today. Just add a GitHub rule to a service account in the admin portal, drop this action into your workflow, and you're off to the races.